Good afternoon and welcome to today's Clergy Check-in for Monday, January 11th. As I look back upon my career as a rabbi and as I look back upon my life, I realize that there are three phrases that come from our tradition that have been instrumental in my Jewish formation, in my Jewish identity and my identity as a human being. The first is one that I learned when I was a very young child, sitting in the sanctuary of my home congregation in Chicago. And above the ark there were Hebrew words that read, Da lifnei mi ata omed, know before whom you stand. And as I came to ponder those words in later life, I realized that it didn't just mean standing in front of the ark, but it meant in terms of what kind of relationship with God would I form, how would God inform my life throughout the years ahead. The second came from my Torah portion for my bat mitzvah, which was Parashat Kedoshim. In it, it begins with Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. Be holy, for I, Adonai, your God, am holy. And then the portion continues to delineate all those ways in which we can achieve holiness in our lives. Not hurting the poor, not putting stumbling blocks before the blind, nor cursing the deaf, leaving a corner of our field to those who are in need. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. And from that portion and from those words, I realized there were times in our lives when we need to separate ourselves from others to achieve that holiness and to find a grounding in our tradition that gives us courage and strength. The third phrase was inscribed on the pulpit of my first position as a rabbi in Great Neck. And it's said from the prophet Amos, who happened to have been the same prophet that was my Haftarah portion for my bat mitzvah. The inscription read, "Let justice well up as waters, and righteousness as a mighty stream." That became a benchmark teaching tool for me throughout my rabbinate, of being able to pursue tzedek, not just justice, but what is right and what is just in our world. As I look to the events of this past week, of the insurrection that took place in Washington, and saw human beings act with total inhumanity, I then thought ahead to what we will be celebrating this coming Friday with the Interfaith Coalition, the birth and life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. When I think of the protests and the insurrection of this past week, and when I think of the protest march that brought about civil rights, how different those two moments were in time. One was sacred and one was not. The civil rights movement was a non-violent movement. And if we look at pictures of those individuals who crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Montgomery, in Selma, heading toward Montgomery on that great march, if we look at the pictures, we see them linked arm in arm, some dressed in suits with ties, leading one another peacefully in demonstration, only to be encountered by police, by local officials, and by white Americans surrounding them with guns, with bats, with anything that could do damage. I think of the people who endured those moments, not just Dr. King or John Lewis, but ordinary people like Joanne Bland, who was one of the youngest people to cross that bridge, who watched her sister be beaten brutally by law enforcement. And so I think of what it means to be the prophet Amos, what it means to let justice well up like water, and then have it go flowing as a mighty stream toward freedom. I hope that you will join us this coming Friday for our celebration of Dr. King's life, and to remember that we are a people in America that once again can be united, that once again needs to find its grounding, once again to know that we stand not just in relationship to God, but we must stand in relationship to one another. I hope you have a good and a safe afternoon.